story of Japan begins more than 14,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. As glaciers retreated and the climate warmed, groups of people found themselves isolated on what would become the Japanese archipelago. These were the Jōmon people, and they would establish one of the most fascinating prehistoric cultures in human history. The name Jōmon comes from the distinctive pottery these people created. When archaeologists in the 19th century first uncovered fragments of ancient ceramics, they noticed intricate patterns pressed into the clay. These patterns came from cords twisted and pressed into the wet pottery before firing, creating elaborate decorative designs. In Japanese, Jōmon means cord pattern, and this simple observation gave its name to an entire era spanning more than 13,000 years. The Jōmon period stretched from approximately 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE, making it one of the longest continuous cultural periods in world history. During this immense span of time, the Jōmon people developed a sophisticated society based on hunting, gathering, and fishing. They lived in semi-permanent villages, often constructed in circular arrangements around central open spaces. Their homes were pit dwellings, partially dug into the earth for insulation, with wooden frames supporting thatched roofs. These settlements varied in size, typically containing 5 to 10 dwellings, along with larger communal buildings used for gatherings and ceremonies. Archaeological evidence reveals that Jōmon communities chose their locations carefully, often near rivers, coasts, or forests rich in resources. The sea provided fish and shellfish, mountains offered game and plant foods, and forests yielded nuts, particularly chestnuts, which became a staple of the Jōmon diet. The pottery of the Jōmon people represents some of the earliest ceramic work in the world. During the incipient phase of the period, beginning around 14,500 BCE, the first pottery appeared. These early vessels were simple, functional containers made by coiling ropes of clay and building them upward in spirals. The potter's wheel was unknown, so all work was done by hand. Vessels were fired in open flames, creating low-fired ceramics that were often uneven in color and texture. As time progressed, Jōmon pottery became increasingly elaborate and artistic. By the Middle Jōmon period, roughly 2,500 to 1,500 BCE, potters were creating extraordinary vessels with flame-shaped rims, crown-like protrusions, and spiral patterns that rank among the most visually stunning ceramics ever produced. These vessels served both practical and ritual purposes. Simple, rough pots were used for cooking and storage, while elaborate pieces likely played roles in ceremonies and religious practices. The Jōmon people manufactured a wide array of tools and implements. Stone tools included knives, axes, and grinding implements for processing nuts and other foods. They created arrowheads for hunting with bows, which allowed them to hunt game from a safe distance. Fishing equipment included hooks and harpoons for catching fish, along with nets woven from plant fibers. Bone tools served various purposes, from needles for sewing to specialized implements for specific tasks. One of the most intriguing aspects of Jōmon culture was their production of clay figurines called dogu. These small sculptures, typically depicting human-like figures with exaggerated features, spread legs, and tiny arms, have puzzled researchers for decades. Found in sites from Hokkaido in the north to the Osaka region in the south, these figurines likely served ceremonial or religious purposes. Many scholars believe they represented fertility symbols or played roles in healing rituals. The elaborate decoration on many dogs suggests they held significant spiritual importance. Archaeological evidence reveals that Jōmon people engaged in complex burial practices. During the early to middle Jōmon period, adults were buried in pit graves arranged in rows within settlements. By the late Jōmon period, graves were sometimes grouped together in settlement centers. In the final Jōmon period, burial sites were often located away from residential areas. Children were buried in pottery vessels, a practice that suggests specific beliefs about childhood and death. The Jōmon economy revolved around the skillful exploitation of natural resources. Nuts, particularly chestnuts, walnuts, and Japanese horse chestnuts, form the backbone of their diet. Chestnuts could be eaten without processing and stored well, making them especially valuable. Japanese horse chestnuts required soaking to remove their bitter taste, and remains of watering facilities for this purpose have been discovered at archaeological sites. Mountain vegetables, mushrooms, and root crops supplemented the diet. The abundance of shell middens throughout Japan indicates that shellfish and other marine resources played crucial roles in coastal communities. Evidence suggests Jōmon people engaged in early forms of plant cultivation. While they were not full-scale agriculturalists, they appear to have managed chestnut groves and may have cultivated certain plants. This represents a transitional stage between pure hunting and gathering and the agricultural practices that would later dominate Japanese society. Advanced technologies emerged during the Jōmon period. Lacquerwork, a technique that uses the sap of lacquer trees to create durable, waterproof coatings, developed as early as the early Jōmon period. This represented sophisticated chemical knowledge and technical skill. The Jōmon people also created dugout canoes, which allowed them to engage in coastal navigation and trade with distant communities. Items such as jade, obsidian, and asphalt have been found far from their sources, indicating extensive trade networks. Physical anthropology provides insights into the Jōmon people themselves. Studies of skeletal remains indicate that men averaged approximately 157 centimeters in height, while women averaged about 147 centimeters. They had muscular builds adapted to their active lifestyle. Facial features included double eyelids, pronounced brow ridges, and prominent noses. Dental analysis reveals cavities were common, suggesting a diet high in starchy foods. Parasitic infections, particularly with whipworms, appear to have been widespread, indicating challenges with sanitation. The population of Jōmon Japan fluctuated over time, influenced by climate changes and resource availability. The warmest period occurred during the Middle Jōmon, which coincided with the period of greatest population density and cultural development. As the climate cooled toward the end of the period, populations declined and communities became smaller and more dispersed. The relationship between the Jōmon people and later populations remains a subject of ongoing research. Modern Japanese people carry approximately 10 to 12% Jōmon ancestry in their genomes, confirmed through genetic studies. The Ainu people of Hokkaido retain stronger genetic connections to Jōmon populations. Many cultural practices and technologies that emerged during the Jōmon period continued to influence Japanese culture long after the period ended. By approximately 300 BCE, changes were occurring that would transform Japanese society. New peoples and technologies were arriving from the Asian continent, bringing rice agriculture, metallurgy, and new forms of social organization. The long Jōmon period was drawing to a close, but its legacy would endure in the genetic makeup, cultural practices, and artistic traditions of Japan. Around 300 BCE, a revolutionary change swept across the Japanese archipelago. New populations arrived from the Korean peninsula and southern China, bringing with them knowledge of wet rice agriculture, bronze working, and iron technology. This influx of new people and practices initiated the Yayoi period, named after the Yayoi district of Tokyo, where characteristic pottery from this era was first discovered in 1884. The introduction of rice agriculture fundamentally altered Japanese society. Rice cultivation had developed in the Yangtze River Valley of China thousands of years earlier, spreading gradually through the Korean peninsula before reaching the Japanese islands. The earliest evidence of rice in Japan dates to around 1000 BCE in Kyushu, but it took several more centuries before rice farming became widespread and economically dominant. Wet rice agriculture required different settlement patterns and social organizations than the hunting and gathering lifestyle of the Jōmon people. Rice paddies needed to be constructed on flat, low-lying land with access to water for irrigation. Communities built elaborate irrigation systems complete with channels, dams, and drainage systems. The remains of ancient paddy fields marked by wooden posts dividing plots have been excavated throughout Japan, revealing sophisticated agricultural engineering. Rice cultivation was labor-intensive and required coordinated effort. Unlike the relatively flexible schedules of hunting and gathering, rice farming demanded work during specific seasons for planting, maintaining, and harvesting. This agricultural calendar necessitated more permanent settlements and stronger social hierarchies to organize labor. Villages grew larger, with populations concentrated near productive agricultural land. The Yayoi people also introduced metallurgy to Japan. Bronze and iron arrived together, though iron quickly became more important for practical tools. Bronze was used primarily for ceremonial objects, weapons, and ornamental items. Bronze mirrors, often with elaborate decorative patterns, became important ritual objects and symbols of authority. Bronze bells, called dotaku, unique to Japan, were created in various sizes and decorated with geometric designs and simple drawings. These bells appear to have served religious or ceremonial purposes. Iron revolutionized tool-making and agriculture. Iron axes, knives, sickles, and hoes made farming more efficient. Though iron rusts easily, meaning fewer artifacts have survived, evidence suggests iron tools were widespread. The availability of iron weapons also changed the nature of conflict, though warfare appears to have been relatively limited during most of the Yayoi period. Yayoi pottery differed markedly from Jōmon ceramics. Where Jōmon pottery was elaborate and decorative, Yayoi pottery emphasized functionality. Vessels were thinner-walled, fired at higher temperatures, and shaped on potter's wheels, representing technological advances. Surface decoration was minimal, typically consisting of simple incised lines or comb patterns. The pottery served practical purposes for cooking, storage, and serving food. Architecture evolved during the Yayoi period. While people continued to build pit dwellings similar to those of the Jōmon era, new forms emerged. Raised floor structures with floors elevated on posts appeared for the first time. These buildings kept stored grain dry and protected from rodents and insects. The raised floor storehouse would become a distinctive feature of Japanese architecture, influencing later shrine designs. The Yayoi people maintained connections with the Asian mainland. Trade goods and cultural elements flowed between Japan, Korea, and China. Chinese historical records from the late 3rd century CE mention the people of Wo, the Chinese name for Japan, describing them as divided into more than 100 states. These accounts provide the first written descriptions of Japanese society, noting details about customs, governance, and tribute relationships. The physical appearance of Yayoi people differed from that of Jōmon populations. Skeletal analysis shows Yayoi individuals were generally taller, with heights averaging 2.5 to 5 centimeters more than Jōmon people. Facial features were different as well, with Yayoi people having flatter facial topography, shallow set eyes, high narrow faces, and less pronounced brow ridges and noses. These differences reflect the influx of populations from the Asian continent. The relationship between incoming Yayoi migrants and indigenous Jōmon populations varied by region. In Kyushu and southern Honshu, Yayoi culture and peoples became dominant. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests significant population replacement occurred in these areas. In northern Honshu and Hokkaido, Jōmon traditions persisted longer. A culture called Zoku Jōmon, representing a continuation of Jōmon practices, remained in the north even as Yayoi culture dominated the south. Population growth accelerated dramatically during the Yayoi period. The productivity of rice agriculture supported much larger populations than hunting and gathering could sustain. Estimates suggest the Japanese population increased by 25 to 70 times over the 1,000 years of the Yayoi period. Some of this increase came from continental immigration, but much resulted from the higher birth rates and food security that agriculture provided. Social stratification increased as rice became the economic foundation of society. Rice could be stored, taxed, and used as a form of wealth. This created opportunities for some individuals and families to accumulate more resources than others. Archaeological evidence reveals differences in burial goods, with elite graves containing bronze mirrors, weapons, and other prestige items. These disparities suggest emerging social hierarchies and political leadership. Regional variations appeared in Yayoi culture. Pottery styles differed between Western and Eastern Japan. Bronze working concentrated in certain areas with distinct regional traditions in mirror and weapon production. These variations reflect developing regional identities and possibly different political units. Chinese records mention numerous small kingdoms or tribal groups, suggesting Japan was politically fragmented during this period. Warfare became more organized during the Yayoi period. Fortified settlements with defensive ditches and palisades appeared, particularly in later Yayoi times. The presence of arrow wounds on skeletal remains increased compared to the Jōmon period, indicating more frequent conflict. Competition for productive agricultural land and the emergence of social stratification likely contributed to increased violence. Religious practices evolved during the Yayoi period. While specific beliefs remain unclear, the production of ritual objects like bronze bells and mirrors indicates complex spiritual practices. Burial customs became more elaborate for elite individuals, suggesting beliefs about the afterlife and the importance of honoring powerful ancestors. These practices would influence later Japanese religious traditions. The Yayoi period laid foundations for many aspects of Japanese culture. Rice cultivation would remain central to the Japanese economy for thousands of years. The social hierarchies that emerged would evolve into the aristocratic and eventually feudal systems of later periods. Technologies introduced during Yayoi times, from ironworking to raised floor architecture, would be refined and elaborated in subsequent eras. By around 250 CE, changes were occurring that would usher in a new period. Burial practices were shifting toward the construction of large mound tombs for powerful leaders. Political centralization was advancing, with some leaders accumulating unprecedented power and authority. The Yayoi period was transitioning into the Kofun period, named for the burial mounds that would become its defining characteristic. The Kofun period, spanning approximately 250 to 538 CE, marked the emergence of Japan's first powerful centralized polities. The period takes its name from the Japanese word for ancient burial, mounds, the massive earthen tombs that became the defining archaeological feature of this era. These monumental structures testify to the emergence of powerful rulers who could command the labor of thousands and possessed unprecedented authority over large regions. The construction of burial mounds began in the late Yayoi period, but exploded in scale and complexity during the Kofun era. The oldest known Kofun, Hokonoyama Kofun in Sakurai, Nara, dates to the late 3rd century. These early tombs were relatively simple mounds built on natural hills. Within decades, however, tomb construction had become far more ambitious, with massive artificial mounds built on flat ground. The most distinctive Kofun took a unique keyhole shape when viewed from above, combining a round mound with a rectangular projection. This Zenpo Koan Fun design became the signature form of elite Japanese burial mounds. The symbolism of this shape remains debated, but it clearly distinguished Japanese tombs from burial traditions elsewhere in East Asia. The scale of some Kofun staggers the imagination. The largest is Daisen Kofun in Sakai, Osaka, traditionally attributed to Emperor Nintoku. This massive tomb measures approximately 486 meters in length and is surrounded by 3 moats. Its construction would have required an estimated workforce of 2,000 people laboring daily for 15 years. The volume of earth moved exceeds that of many famous ancient structures, including the Great Pyramid of Giza. Kofun construction followed distinct phases. Early Kofun in the 4th century were built into natural topography, utilizing and modifying existing hills. By the 5th century, builders created massive mounds on flat land, often surrounded by moats. The interior structures evolved as well. Early Kofun featured vertical shafts leading to burial chambers at the mound's summit. Later tombs included horizontal passages leading to stone burial chambers, allowing for multiple interments and more elaborate funeral ceremonies. The contents of Kofun provide insights into the beliefs, technology, and social structures of the period. Burial goods included bronze mirrors, often imported from China or Korea, which served as symbols of authority. Iron weapons, including swords, spears, and armor, indicated the deceased's military power. Personal ornaments made from jade, glass, and other precious materials demonstrated wealth and status. Curved jewels called magatama held particular significance as symbols of imperial power. One of the most distinctive features of Kofun was the haniwa placed on and around the mounds. These terracotta sculptures, initially simple cylinders, evolved into elaborate representations of houses, weapons, animals, and human figures. Haniwa depicted warriors in full armor, noble women in court dress, farmers at work, and musicians performing. These clay figures provide invaluable information about clothing, architecture, military equipment, and daily life during the Kofun period. The pottery technology of the Kofun period advanced significantly. A new type called su-ware appeared, fired at temperatures of 1,000 to 1,200 degrees Celsius. This high-temperature firing produced gray, durable ceramics superior to earlier pottery. Su-ware represented Korean influence and would remain important in Japanese ceramics for centuries. Traditional haji ware continued alongside su-ware, used for everyday purposes. The political structure of Kofun Japan centered on the Yamato polity, based in the Kinai region around modern Nara and Osaka. The Yamato clan claimed descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu and would eventually become Japan's imperial family. During the Kofun period, Yamato leaders extended their influence across Honshu and into Kyushu through alliances, marriages, and military force. The Yamato state was not a centralized empire in the modern sense. Rather, it represented a confederation of powerful clans, with the Yamato occupying the paramount position. Regional leaders maintained considerable autonomy in their territories while acknowledging Yamato authority and contributing military forces when required. This system of indirect rule would characterize Japanese political organization for centuries. Contact with the Korean peninsula intensified during the Kofun period. Japan maintained close ties with the Korean kingdom of Baekje, which served as a conduit for Chinese culture and technology. Japanese forces intervened in Korean affairs, attempting to support Baekje against its rivals, the kingdoms of Silla and Goguryeo. In 663, a Japanese fleet was defeated by Silla's navy, ending Japan's military involvement on the peninsula. Korean and Chinese immigrants brought vital knowledge and skills to Japan during this period. Scribes introduced the Chinese writing system, allowing Japanese elites to keep records and communicate with continental courts. Craftsmen taught advanced techniques in metalworking, pottery, weaving, and other industries. Buddhist monks would arrive in the 6th century, bringing a new religion that would transform Japanese culture. The introduction of the horse revolutionized Japanese warfare and society. Horses arrived in Japan during the early Kofun period, probably from Korea. Cavalry quickly became an important military arm, and horse equipment features prominently in Kofun burial goods. Haniwa sculptures of horses, often with elaborate saddles and decorations, testify to their importance. The ability to maintain cavalry forces became a mark of elite status. Agriculture continued to develop during the Kofun period. Iron tools made farming more efficient, and new crops and techniques were introduced from the continent. Irrigation systems grew more sophisticated, allowing rice cultivation to expand into previously unsuitable areas. The agricultural surplus supported larger populations and financed the massive construction projects of the era. Social stratification became more pronounced. A clear aristocracy emerged, with powerful clan leaders controlling lands and people. The Ujikabane system categorized clans by their supposed descent and relationship to the Yamato court. Some clans claimed divine ancestry, while others traced their origins to Korean or Chinese immigrants. This system of hereditary status would influence Japanese society for centuries. The Kofun period saw the development of early Shinto beliefs and practices. While Shinto would not be formalized as a distinct religion until much later, Many of its fundamental concepts emerged during this era. Beliefs in kami, spiritual beings inhabiting natural features, and ancestral spirits became widespread. Ritual purification practices developed. Sacred spaces were designated for worship, often in natural settings. Written records from this period are scarce and problematic. The Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, compiled in the 8th century, claim to record events from the Kofun period, but their accounts of early history are heavily mythologized. Modern historians treat these texts cautiously, using them alongside archaeological evidence to reconstruct the period. By the early 6th century, Kofun culture was changing. Burial mounds became smaller, and the practice of building massive Kofun declined. New ideas and influences from the continent were arriving, particularly Buddhism. The Yamato state was evolving toward a more Chinese-style centralized government. The Kofun period was transitioning into the Asuka period, named for the Asuka region where the Yamato court was based. The legacy of the Kofun period endures. The burial mounds remain prominent features in Japan's landscape, with tens of thousands scattered across the country. The Yamato clan established during this period evolved into Japan's imperial family, providing an unbroken line of emperors continuing to the present. The social structures, religious concepts, and artistic traditions that emerged during the Kofun period would shape Japanese culture for centuries to come. The introduction of Buddhism to Japan in the 6th century marked one of the most significant cultural transformations in Japanese history. In 538 or 552, envoys from the Korean kingdom of Baekje presented Buddhist texts, images, and ritual objects to the Japanese court. This event initiated a process that would fundamentally reshape Japanese religion, art, architecture, philosophy, and political thought. The arrival of Buddhism coincided with Japan's entrance into recorded history. The Asuka period, spanning 538 to 710, takes its name from the Asuka region, south of modern Nara, where the imperial court was based. Unlike previous eras defined by archaeological evidence, the Asuka period can be understood through written records, though these must be interpreted carefully as many were composed centuries later. Buddhism's introduction sparked controversy among Japanese elites. The powerful Soga clan enthusiastically embraced the new religion, seeing it as a source of cultural prestige and a way to strengthen ties with continental powers. Other clans, particularly the Mononobe and Nakatomi, opposed Buddhism as a foreign intrusion threatening traditional Japanese spiritual practices. This conflict culminated in military confrontations, with the Soga clan emerging victorious in 587. Prince Shotoku, who served as regent from 594 to 622, became Buddhism's most influential early patron. He founded numerous temples, including Horyuji, which contains the world's oldest surviving wooden structures. Shotoku studied Buddhist teachings personally and composed commentaries on sutras. He also dispatched official embassies to Sui China, establishing diplomatic relations that would facilitate the flow of Buddhist texts, teachers, and cultural influences. Shotoku promulgated Japan's first constitution, the 17-article Constitution of 604. This document blended Buddhist ethics, Confucian political philosophy, and traditional Japanese concepts. It emphasized moral behavior, harmony, and respect for the emperor. While not a legal code in the modern sense, it established principles that would guide Japanese governance for centuries. The Soga clan dominated politics during much of the Asuka period, but their power ended dramatically in 645. A coup led by Nakatomi no Kamatari and Prince Naka no Oe overthrew the Soga and initiated a series of reforms modeled on Tang China's governmental structure. These Taika reforms aimed to centralize power under the emperor and establish a bureaucratic state. The reforms nationalized all land, which theoretically belonged to the emperor. The government would allot fields to cultivators who would pay taxes directly to the central government rather than to local lords. A system of provinces and districts replaced the old clan-based territories. Chinese-style governmental offices, including ministries and departments, were established. The reforms also introduced a census system and standardized legal codes. In reality, implementing these reforms proved difficult. Local power holders resisted centralization, and the old clan system persisted alongside new structures. Nevertheless, the Taika reforms represented a decisive shift toward a Chinese-style state. The emperor's role evolved from that of a paramount clan leader to that of a divine sovereign ruling through a bureaucratic government. In 710, the imperial court established a permanent capital at Heijōkyō, present-day Nara. This marked the beginning of the Nara period, lasting until 794. The capital was laid out in a grid pattern modeled on China's capital Chang'an, with broad avenues dividing the city into regular blocks. Imperial palaces, government offices, aristocratic mansions, and Buddhist temples filled the capital. Buddhism flourished during the Nara period. The government actively promoted Buddhism as a state religion, building elaborate temples that served as centers of learning, art, and political power. The most famous is Todaiji, completed in 752. Its great Buddha hall housed a massive bronze Buddha statue, requiring an estimated 444 tons of bronze and hundreds of pounds of gold. The construction project strained government finances but demonstrated the intimate connection between Buddhism and state power. Different schools of Buddhism emerged, each emphasizing different scriptures and practices. The Sanron, Jojitsu, Hoso, Kusha, Kegon, and Ritsu schools established themselves at major temples. These schools focused primarily on philosophical study and elaborate rituals. While they enjoyed government patronage, they had limited impact on common people's lives. Buddhism during this period remained largely an elite religion. The arts flourished in the Asuka and Nara periods. Buddhist sculpture reached extraordinary heights, with Korean and Chinese craftsmen training Japanese artisans. Early works showed strong continental influence, but a distinctly Japanese aesthetic gradually emerged. Sculptors created images in bronze, wood, clay, and lacquer. The Kudara canon at Horyuji exemplifies the grace and sophistication of Asuka period sculpture. Architecture developed under Chinese influence. Temple complexes followed Chinese models with pagodas, golden halls, lecture halls, and bell towers arranged in prescribed layouts. Construction techniques improved, allowing for larger and more elaborate buildings. The curved roofs, interlocking wooden joints, and other features that characterize traditional Japanese architecture emerged during this period. Literature and scholarship advanced significantly. Japan's first histories, the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, were compiled in 712 and 720, respectively. These works attempted to establish Japan's place in East Asian civilization by recording myths, legends, and historical events. They presented the imperial line as descended from divine beings, legitimizing imperial authority. The Manyoshu, an anthology of poems compiled in the late 8th century, represents the earliest major work of Japanese literature. It contains over 4,000 poems by aristocrats, monks, soldiers, and common people. The collection demonstrates the sophistication of Japanese poetic expression and preserves examples of early written Japanese. Chinese culture permeated Nara period Japan. Aristocrats studied Chinese classics, wrote poetry in Chinese, and adopted Chinese styles of dress and behavior. The government sent missions to Tang China, with students and monks spending years or decades studying continental culture. These envoys brought back not just knowledge, but also material goods, from medicines to art objects. Despite massive Chinese influence, Japanese culture maintained distinctive characteristics. The Japanese language, fundamentally different from Chinese, required the adaptation of Chinese characters into a writing system that could express Japanese sounds and grammar. Two phonetic scripts, hiragana and katakana, would later develop from simplified Chinese characters, allowing written Japanese to capture the language's full complexity. Social structure during the Nara period was rigidly hierarchical. The aristocracy, tracing descent from the ancient clans, occupied the top ranks. They monopolized government positions and lived in luxury, supported by taxes from peasant farmers. Below them came ordinary free farmers who bore heavy tax burdens. At the bottom were slaves, though slavery was gradually declining. Women of the aristocracy enjoyed relatively high status during this period. They could own property, inherit wealth, and participate in court life. Several empresses reigned during the Nara period, demonstrating that female sovereigns were accepted. However, as Chinese Confucian ideas emphasizing male authority spread, women's status would gradually decline in subsequent centuries. Economic development supported cultural flowering. Agricultural productivity increased through improved tools, techniques, and expansion of cultivated land. Handicraft industries produced textiles, ceramics, metalwork, and other goods. Trade brought luxury items from China and Korea. The government minted coins, though barter remained common for everyday transactions. Problems emerged toward the end of the Nara period. Buddhist temples had accumulated vast tax-exempt landholdings, reducing government revenues. Aristocratic families competed for power and influence at court. Provincial administration was often corrupt and inefficient. Periodic famines, epidemics, and natural disasters strained society. Small-scale rebellions occurred in outlying regions. Perhaps most troubling was Buddhism's growing political involvement. Monks accumulated power and interfered in governmental affairs. The monk Dokyo became particularly influential, allegedly seeking to become emperor himself. This crisis helped prompt the decision to move the capital away from Nara and its politically powerful temples. In 794, Emperor Kamu relocated the capital to Heian, present-day Kyoto. This marked the end of the Nara period and the beginning of the Heian period. The move was intended to escape the interference of Nara's Buddhist establishment and provide a fresh start for imperial government. The new capital would remain Japan's political and cultural center for more than 1,000 years. The Asuka and Nara periods established patterns that would shape Japanese civilization for centuries. Buddhism became permanently embedded in Japanese culture, though it would continue to evolve. The Chinese model of centralized bureaucratic government provided a framework, even if actual practice often diverged from the ideal. The arts, architecture, and literature developed during these periods laid foundations for later flowering. Japan had transformed from a collection of competing polities into a unified state participating in East Asian civilization. The Heian period, spanning 794 to 1185, represents the classical age of Japanese culture. Named for the capital Heian, modern Kyoto, this era saw the full flowering of an indigenous Japanese aesthetic distinct from Chinese models. While the imperial court gradually lost political power, it presided over a cultural renaissance that produced some of Japan's greatest artistic and literary achievements. Emperor Kamu moved the capital from Nara to Heian in 794. The new capital, built in a basin surrounded by mountains, followed the same grid pattern as Nara, modeled on Chinese precedents. The city would grow to become one of the world's great urban centers, remaining Japan's capital for more than 1,000 years. The early Heian period saw continued efforts at centralized government. However, the Chinese model of bureaucratic rule proved difficult to maintain. The Ritsuryo system of land allocation and taxation gradually broke down as powerful families accumulated private estates called shuen. These estates, often exempted from taxation through various legal manipulations, reduced government revenues and weakened central authority. The Fujiwara clan emerged as the dominant power during the Heian period. Founded by Fujiwara no Kamatari, who had helped overthrow the Soga clan in 645, the Fujiwara rose to unprecedented heights. Through a simple but effective strategy, they married their daughters to emperors, then ruled as regents when those emperors' sons inherited the throne. As grandfathers and uncles of emperors, Fujiwara patriarchs wielded immense power. Fujiwara no Yoshifusa became the first regent for an adult emperor in 858. His descendants monopolized the positions of regent and chief advisor for generations. At the clan's zenith, Fujiwara no Michinaga, who dominated the court from 995 to 1027, married 4 daughters to emperors and became grandfather to 3 successive emperors. His power was absolute, though exercised from behind the scenes rather than through direct rule. The Fujiwara governed not through force, but through cultural sophistication and mastery of court politics. They cultivated refined aesthetics, sponsored artists and poets, and patronized Buddhism. Their capital became a center of literary and artistic achievement, where aristocrats competed to demonstrate their cultural accomplishment and taste. Heian aristocratic society was extraordinarily refined and ritualized. Every aspect of life, from the correct way to fold a letter to the appropriate depth of a bow, was governed by complex rules of etiquette. Aristocrats devoted themselves to poetry, composition, calligraphy, music, and aesthetic pursuits. Political power and cultural sophistication were inseparable. Literature flourished during the Heian period. The development of kana, phonetic scripts that could easily express Japanese sounds, revolutionized writing. Previously, Japanese could only be written using Chinese characters adapted for Japanese words and grammatical elements, a cumbersome process. Kana allowed writers to capture Japanese's full expressiveness. Women of the court became particularly important literary figures. While men typically wrote in Chinese, which was considered the language of serious scholarship and government, women wrote primarily in Japanese using kana. This paradoxically gave female writers freedom to experiment and innovate. Court ladies produced many of the period's greatest works. The Tale of Genji, written by Murasaki Shikibu around the year 1000, stands as one of the world's great novels. This lengthy work follows Prince Genji, an imperial son, through his romantic adventures, political intrigues, and eventual decline. The novel brilliantly portrays Heian court life with psychological depth and aesthetic sophistication that remain remarkable even today. Its influence on Japanese literature and culture cannot be overstated. The Pillow Book by Sei Shonagon, another court lady, offers a different literary form. This collection of essays, lists, and observations provides intimate glimpses into court life, revealing Sei Shonagon's sharp wit, aesthetic sensibility, and sometimes caustic judgments. Her descriptions of seasonal beauties, social interactions, and personal preferences create a vivid, portrait of aristocratic values and concerns. Poetry remains central to Heian culture. The waka, a 31-syllable verse, form arranged in lines of 5-7, 5-7, and 7 syllables, became the dominant poetic form. Aristocrats exchanged poems constantly, using them for courtship, political communication, and social interaction. The ability to compose elegant poetry appropriate to the occasion was essential for success at court. The Kokinshu, an imperial anthology compiled in 905, collected over 1,100 poems and established standards for Japanese poetry. The preface, written by Ki no Tsurayuki, defended Japanese poetry's value despite Chinese poetry's prestige. This represented growing confidence in Japanese cultural distinctiveness. Visual arts developed characteristic Japanese styles during the Heian period. Yamato-e painting, depicting Japanese landscapes and scenes rather than Chinese subjects, emerged as a distinct tradition. These paintings often illustrated literary works or seasonal activities rendered in bright colors with strong decorative elements. Architecture evolved toward distinctly Japanese forms. While early Heian buildings followed Chinese models, indigenous styles developed. Shinden-zukuri, the architectural style of aristocratic residences, featured main halls connected to subsidiary buildings by covered corridors, all arranged symmetrically around a garden with ponds and artificial hills. These estates embodied aesthetic principles that would influence Japanese design for centuries. Buddhism transformed during the Heian period. Two new schools, Tendai and Shingon, were introduced from China in the early 9th century. Saicho founded the Tendai school on Mount Hiei, near Kyoto, while Kukai established the Shingon school on Mount Koya. Both emphasized esoteric teachings and elaborate rituals accessible only to trained monks. These schools differed from Nara period Buddhism in significant ways. They were based in mountain monasteries rather than urban temples, emphasizing withdrawal from worldly affairs. They incorporated elements of indigenous Japanese spirituality, creating a synthesis between Buddhism and native beliefs. They taught that enlightenment could be achieved in this life through proper practice. The belief that Japan had entered Mappo, the age of the declining Dharma, spread during the late Heian period. Buddhist teachings predicted that after Buddha's death, the Dharma would decline through 3 ages, culminating in a degenerate era when enlightenment through traditional practices would become nearly impossible. Many believe this age had begun in 1052. This belief fostered new Buddhist movements, emphasizing salvation through faith rather than difficult practices. Devotion to Amida Buddha and his Pure Land paradise became popular. Believers trusted that sincere invocation of Amida's name would ensure rebirth in the Pure Land after death. This accessible teaching appealed to people who could not devote themselves to monastic discipline. The relationship between Buddhism and native Japanese beliefs deepened during the Heian period. The theory of Honji Sujaku held that Japanese kami were manifestations of Buddhist deities. This allowed Buddhism and indigenous practices to coexist and merge, creating a distinctive Japanese religious synthesis. Shrines and temples were often built near each other, and many religious practitioners served both traditions. While the imperial court flourished culturally, its political power declined. The Shun system of tax-exempt estates expanded, starving the central government of revenue. Provincial administration weakened as local strongmen accumulated power. The court's control over outlying regions became increasingly nominal. Military power shifted to provincial warriors who protected local estates and maintained order. These warriors, eventually known as samurai, developed their own culture emphasizing martial skills, loyalty, and honor. Though initially subordinate to court aristocrats, they would eventually supersede the nobility as Japan's ruling class. The late Heian period saw increasing disorder. In the capital, armed monks from Mount Hiei and other temples descended periodically to intimidate the court into granting their demands. In the provinces, warriors fought over land and influence. The government proved unable to maintain order effectively. 2 warrior clans, the Taira and Minamoto, rose to particular prominence. Both descended from imperial princes who had been given clan names and sent to the provinces. They built networks of military retainers and accumulated wealth and influence. Eventually, these clans would compete for dominance, plunging Japan into civil war. The rivalry between Taira and Minamoto exploded in the Hogan Rebellion of 1156 and the Heiji Rebellion of 1159. These conflicts arose from succession disputes and political intrigues at court, but warriors played decisive roles. The Taira emerged victorious, with Taira no Kiyomori becoming the most powerful figure in Japan. Kiyomori followed the Fujiwara model, marrying his daughter to the emperor and dominating the court as grandfather to the infant emperor. He appointed his relatives to high offices and accumulated vast wealth. However, his dominance bred resentment among other warrior clans and even within his own family. In 1180, Minamoto no Yoritomo, who had survived the earlier conflicts as a child, raised an army against the Taira. The resulting Genpei War, lasting from 1180 to 1185, devastated much of Japan. The conflict culminated in the naval battle of Dan no Ura in 1185, where the Minamoto fleet annihilated the Taira. The child emperor drowned, and the Taira clan was nearly exterminated. The Genpei War produced legendary tales of heroism, tragedy, and loyalty that would be retold for centuries. The tale, of the Heike, a war chronicle narrating the conflict, became one of Japan's most influential works. Its Buddhist theme of the impermanence of worldly glory and power resonated deeply in Japanese culture. Minamoto no Yoritomo emerged as Japan's supreme military leader. Rather than taking a position at the imperial court in Kyoto, he established his headquarters at Kamakura, a small town in eastern Japan surrounded by protective hills. From this base, he created a new form of government that would transform Japanese politics. The Heian period ended with the establishment of Yoritomo's government. While emperors would continue to reign in Kyoto, real power now rested with military leaders. The age of aristocratic rule had passed. Japan was entering the age of the warrior. The Heian period left an enduring cultural legacy. The literature, art, and aesthetic sensibilities developed during these centuries became foundational to Japanese culture. The image of refined courtiers composing poetry while viewing cherry blossoms or autumn leaves captured the Japanese imagination. Even as political power shifted to warriors, the cultural ideals of the Heian period continued to influence Japanese society. The Kamakura period, spanning 1185 to 1333, marked the beginning of military rule in Japan. For the first time, warriors rather than aristocrats or emperors held supreme power. This era established patterns of military government that would persist, with interruptions until the 19th century. Minamoto no Yoritomo, victor of the Genpei War, established his government at Kamakura, far from the imperial court in Kyoto. This physical separation reflected a fundamental shift in power. The emperor remained in Kyoto as a symbolic sovereign, performing ritual functions and granting legitimacy. Real authority, however, resided with Yoritomo and his warrior government. In 1192, the emperor appointed Yoritomo as Sei Taishogun, barbarian subduing generalissimo. This ancient military title, originally created for commanders fighting the Emishi people in northern Japan, became the designation for Japan's military rulers. Shortened to shogun, it would become synonymous with military dictatorship. Yoritomo created a governmental structure distinct from the imperial bureaucracy. His government, called the bakufu, or tent government, originally consisted of simple administrative offices staffed by his warrior vassals, and the most important office was the samurai dokoro, which supervised the warrior class and adjudicated disputes among them. The relationship between warriors and their lords formed the foundation of Kamakura government. Warriors pledged loyalty and military service to their lord in exchange for grants of land or rights to income from estates. These bonds were personal and hereditary. A warrior's honor depended on absolute loyalty to his lord, while a lord's legitimacy required fulfilling obligations to his vassals. This system of mutual obligation, later called feudalism by historians, drawing parallels to medieval Europe, differed significantly from the Chinese bureaucratic model that had dominated earlier Japanese government. It reflected Japanese society's increasingly military character and the practical needs of managing a warrior class. Yoritomo proved as ruthless in peace as in war. He systematically eliminated potential rivals, including his younger brother, Minamoto no Yoshitsune, a brilliant general whose victories had been crucial in defeating the Taira. Yoritomo's suspicion and jealousy led him to turn against Yoshitsune, driving him into exile and eventually to death. This tragedy became a beloved theme in Japanese literature and drama. When Yoritomo died in 1199, supposedly from falling off his horse, his government faced crisis. His sons proved weak rulers. Real power passed to the Hojo family, who had been important vassals of the Minamoto. The Hojo established themselves as regents for the shoguns, creating a remarkable situation where regents controlled shoguns who theoretically ruled on behalf of emperors. Hojo Tokumasa, Yoritomo's father-in-law, became the first shikin, or regent, in 1203. After engineering the assassination of Yoritomo's sons, the Hojo installed puppet shoguns from the Fujiwara family and later imperial princes. The Hojo regents ruled Japan for more than a century, demonstrating that effective power mattered more than formal position. The Jokyu disturbance of 1221 tested the new military government. Retired Emperor Go-Toba, chafing under warrior domination, attempted to overthrow the Kamakura government. He called on warriors throughout Japan to support the imperial cause. The Hojo responded decisively, crushing the rebellion and exiling Go-Toba and 2 other emperors to remote islands. This victory confirmed warrior supremacy over the imperial court. The Bakufu established the Rokuhara Tandai in Kyoto to monitor the court in western Japan. The government confiscated 3,000 estates from rebel supporters, distributing them to loyal warriors. The balance of power had shifted decisively toward Kamakura. The most dramatic challenge to Kamakura came from overseas. In 1268, Kublai Khan, who had conquered China and established the Yuan dynasty, sent envoys demanding Japanese submission. The Bakufu rejected these demands. Kublai began preparing an invasion. In 1274, a Mongol fleet carrying 23,000 soldiers departed Korea for Japan. The invasion force landed on Kyushu and attacked several sites. Japanese defenders fought bravely but found themselves outmatched by Mongol tactics and weapons. The Mongols used massed formations, explosive projectiles, and coordinated cavalry charges. Japanese samurai, trained for individual combat, struggled against these methods. However, the Mongols did not press their advantage. After a day of fighting, they withdrew to their ships. That night, a storm struck, damaging many vessels and forcing the fleet to return to Korea. The Japanese called this divine wind, or kamikaze, believing the gods had intervened to protect Japan. The respite proved temporary. Kublai sent envoys again in 1275, demanding submission. The Bakufu executed the envoys and prepared for another invasion. Warriors built stone walls along likely landing sites in Kyushu. Supplies were gathered and troops were mobilized. In 1281, an enormous Mongol fleet carrying perhaps 140,000 troops departed China and Korea. This armada represented one of the largest seaborne invasions attempted before modern times. The fleet reached Kyushu and established beachheads despite fierce Japanese resistance. For nearly 2 months, fighting raged along Kyushu's coast. The Japanese defensive walls helped even the tactical disparity, and samurai adapted their tactics. Small boats attacked Mongol ships at night, creating havoc. The Mongols struggled to establish secure bases for their vast army. In mid-August, another massive storm struck. For 2 days, typhoon winds battered the Mongol fleet. Ships were driven onto rocks, capsized or sunk. The army was scattered and demoralized. The survivors retreated and the invasion collapsed. Japanese losses were significant, but the Mongol threat had been eliminated. The invasions had profound effects on Japan. The Bakufu emerged with enhanced prestige for organizing successful defense. However, rewarding the warriors who had fought proved difficult. The invasions had produced no plunder or conquered land to distribute. Many warriors, having neglected their estates to serve in Kyushu, found themselves impoverished. Discontent grew among the warrior class. The Kamakura period saw significant religious developments. Pure Land Buddhism continued to gain followers. Honen had established Jōdoshu, the Pure Land School, in 1175, teaching that salvation came through faith in Amida Buddha alone. His disciple Shinran went further, founding Jodo Shinshu True Pure Land School, which taught that a single, sincere invocation of Amida's name guaranteed salvation. These accessible teachings appealed to common people who could not pursue monastic discipline. Pure Land Buddhism spread rapidly, particularly in rural areas. Its emphasis on faith over learning democratized Buddhism, making salvation available to everyone, regardless of education or social status. Nichiren, a charismatic monk, founded another influential school. He taught devotion to the Lotus Sutra as the only path to salvation and engaged in fierce criticism of other Buddhist schools. His nationalism, claiming Japan as the center of Buddhism's final age, resonated with many. Despite persecution, his teachings gained followers and would remain influential. Zen Buddhism arrived from China during the Kamakura period and found
our particular favor among the warrior class. Zen emphasized meditation and direct experience of enlightenment over textual study. Its aesthetic simplicity, discipline, and focus on present moment awareness appealed to samurai values. Zen monasteries became centers of Chinese learning, introducing art, architecture, and philosophy. The cultural relationship with China deepened during the Kamakura period, despite the Mongol threat. Zen monks traveled to China for study, bringing back not just religious teachings but also art, literature, and technology. Chinese styles influenced Japanese painting, architecture, and garden design. However, Japanese artists increasingly adapted Chinese models to indigenous tastes. Literature during the Kamakura period reflected the warrior ethos. War tales like the tale of the Heike, Heiji Monogatari, and Genpei Seisuiki narrated battles and heroic deeds in vivid detail. These works, often recited by traveling entertainers accompanied by lutes, celebrated warrior virtues while incorporating Buddhist themes of impermanence and karma. The Kamakura Bakufu developed legal codes systematizing warrior law. The Goseibai Shikamoku of 1232 codified precedents and established procedures for settling disputes. This practical legal code, written in simple Japanese rather than classical Chinese, contrasted with the complex Ritsuryo codes based on Chinese models. It reflected warriors' pragmatic approach to governance. Social structure became more rigid during the Kamakura period. The distinction between warriors and other classes sharpened. Warrior families developed strong house consciousness, with clear hierarchies and inheritance patterns. The practice of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited the main estate and headship, became more common, though daughters could still inherit property. Women's status declined during the Kamakura period. While women could still own property and head households in some cases, their rights were increasingly restricted. The influence of Chinese Confucian thought, which emphasized male authority and female subordination, contributed to this decline. Warrior culture's emphasis on martial prowess and loyalty, bonds between men, further marginalized women. Economic development continued despite political turmoil. Agricultural productivity increased through improved tools, techniques, and irrigation. Markets became more common and the use of money spread. Craft guilds organized artisans in major cities. Trade with China, though officially limited, flourished through private merchants and smugglers. By the early 14th century, the Kamakura Bakufu was weakening. The rewards problem after the Mongol invasions had created lasting discontent. The Hojo regions became increasingly isolated from warriors outside their immediate vassals. Succession disputes within the imperial family provided opportunities for ambitious figures to challenge the status quo. Emperor Go-Daigo, who
ascended the throne in 1318, proved unwilling to accept warrior domination. He began plotting to overthrow the Kamakura government and restore imperial rule. His first attempt in 1324 failed, but he persisted. In 1333, he raised the standard of rebellion again. This time, circumstances favored Go-Daigo. Powerful warriors defected from Kamakura, including Ashikaga Takauji, whom the Bakufu had sent to crush the rebellion. Nita Yoshisada, another important warrior, besieged Kamakura itself. In the 5th month of 1333, Kamakura fell. The Hojo regents and their families committed suicide. The Kamakura Bakufu was destroyed. The Kamakura period established the warrior class as Japan's ruling elite. The institutions and values developed during this era would shape Japanese society for centuries. The ideal of the loyal samurai serving his lord became central to Japanese identity. The tension between military rulers and symbolic emperors would continue to characterize Japanese politics. Buddhism adapted to Japanese conditions, producing schools that continue to the present. Despite its eventual collapse, the Kamakura period's legacy endured. The Muromachi period, spanning 1336 to 1573, and the subsequent Sengoku period, lasting until 1603, comprised nearly 3 centuries of decentralized rule and endemic warfare. Despite political chaos, these eras witnessed extraordinary cultural achievements and the transformation of Japanese society. Emperor Go-Daigo's restoration after the Kamakura Bakufu's fall proved short-lived. The emperor attempted to revive direct imperial rule, rewarding his supporters and sidelining warriors who had expected recognition. Ashikaga Takauji, the powerful warrior who had betrayed Kamakura, grew dissatisfied with his treatment. In 1336, he turned against Go-Daigo, drove him from Kyoto, and installed a new emperor from a rival branch of the imperial family. Go-Daigo fled south to Yoshino, taking the imperial regalia and claiming legitimacy. For the next 56 years, Japan had two rival emperors, one in Kyoto supported by the Ashikaga, and one in Yoshino representing Go-Daigo's line. The northern and southern courts' schism divided warrior families and produced continued warfare. Ashikaga Takauji established a new shogunate in 1338, positioning it in the Muromachi district of Kyoto. Unlike the Kamakura shoguns who ruled from eastern Japan, the Ashikaga based themselves in the imperial capital. This proximity to the court had advantages and disadvantages. The shoguns could monitor the emperor and participate in court culture, but they could not maintain the independent power base that Minamoto and Hojo had enjoyed in Kamakura. The Ashikaga shogunate never achieved the centralized control the Kamakura Bakufu had exercised. Provincial warriors called daimyo, or great names, ruled their domains with considerable autonomy. The shogun depended on the cooperation of powerful daimyo, who often had their own agendas. When shoguns were strong and skillful, they could maintain authority. When weak, their power evaporated. Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, the third shogun, reigning from 1368 to 1394, represented the shogunate at its zenith. He reunited the northern and southern courts in 1392, ending the schism. He built the magnificent Golden Pavilion in Kyoto, demonstrating wealth and cultural sophistication. He established official trade relations with Ming China, bringing prestige and profit. Yoshimitsu patronized the arts enthusiastically. During his rule, no drama reached its mature form. This highly stylized theatrical art, combining dance, music, poetry, and elaborate costumes, emerged from earlier popular performances. Zami, a no-actor and playwright whom Yoshimitsu patronized, established aesthetic principles and wrote plays that remain in the repertoire. No embodied Zen Buddhist concepts and appealed to refined taste. The Onin War of 1467 to 1477 devastated Kyoto and marked the beginning of the Sengoku period, the age of warring states. This conflict began as a succession dispute within the Ashikaga family and escalated into a massive war involving daimyo from across Japan. For 10 years, armies fought in and around Kyoto, reducing much of the city to ruins. When the war ended, the shogunate had lost all real authority. The Sengoku period saw constant warfare as daimyo fought for territory and power. The term warring states, borrowed from Chinese history, captured the era's character. Alliances formed and dissolved rapidly. Warfare was endemic, with battles occurring somewhere in Japan almost continuously. Central authority had collapsed, and power belonged to whoever could seize and hold it. This chaos produced remarkable social mobility. The principle of Gekkokujo, those below overthrowing those above, characterized the era. Vassals killed their lords and seized their domains. Common soldiers rose to become daimyo through military skill and ruthless ambition. Traditional social hierarchies meant little when survival depended on military effectiveness. Daimyo governed their domains like independent states. They promulgated laws, collected taxes, organized armies, and conducted diplomacy. Competition forced them to govern efficiently and mobilize resources effectively. Those who could not adapt disappeared. The successful daimyo built strong castle towns, encouraged trade and agriculture, and maintained loyal warrior bands. Military technology evolved dramatically during the Sengoku period. In 1543, Portuguese traders introduced firearms to Japan. The arquebus, a matchlock gun, revolutionized warfare. Japanese craftsmen quickly mastered gun manufacturing, and within decades, Japan possessed more firearms than any European nation. Daimyo, who effectively integrated guns into their armies, gained decisive advantages. Castles became increasingly elaborate and sophisticated. Earlier fortifications had been simple wooden structures on hills. Sengoku period castles were massive stone fortifications with multiple baileys, complex entrance systems, and tall central towers or keeps. These castles served as administrative centers, military bases, and symbols of daimyo power. The greatest surviving examples, like Himeji Castle, date from this era. European contact increased after the Portuguese arrival. Traders sought Japanese silver, silk, and other goods. Missionaries, particularly Jesuits, began converting Japanese to Christianity. Francis Xavier arrived in 1549 and established missions in western Japan. Christianity spread surprisingly quickly, particularly in Kyushu, where some daimyo converted, partly for spiritual reasons and partly to facilitate trade with Europeans. By 1570, perhaps 300,000 Japanese had converted to Christianity. Missionaries established churches, schools, and hospitals. They translated Christian texts into Japanese and trained Japanese clergy. Christian influence on Japanese society grew, introducing new ideas and cultural practices. However, Christianity also generated opposition. Buddhist monks viewed it as a threat. Some daimyo feared Christian converts would place loyalty to the church above loyalty to their lords. The organized nature of Christian communities worried rulers who valued control. These tensions would eventually lead to violent suppression. Cultural development continued despite warfare. The tea ceremony evolved into an elaborate art form embodying Zen aesthetic principles. Sen no Rikyu perfected wabi-cha, the way of tea emphasizing rustic simplicity, restraint, and appreciation of humble objects. The ceremony became a spiritual practice and social ritual among warriors and merchants. Painting flourished during the Muromachi and Sengoku periods. The Kano school, founded by Kano Masanobu, dominated Japanese painting for centuries. Kano artists painted both Chinese-style ink paintings and colorful decorative works for castle and palace interiors. Their bold compositions, featuring gold backgrounds and natural subjects, epitomized the period's aesthetic. Literature adapted to the era's martial character. War tales continued to be popular, now focusing on contemporary battles and heroes. The oral tradition remained strong, with traveling performers narrating battles and heroic deeds. Poetry continued, though often with melancholic themes reflecting the era's violence and impermanence. Gardens reached new heights of sophistication. Dry landscape gardens using rocks, gravel, and minimal vegetation to create abstract compositions embodied Zen philosophy. The garden at Ryoanji Temple in Kyoto, created during this period, represents this aesthetic at its purest. These gardens were designed for meditation and contemplation rather than strolling. Economic development proceeded despite political chaos. Agricultural productivity increased through double cropping and improved techniques. Mining expanded, producing copper, silver, and gold. Cities grew as merchants and artisans congregated for safety and opportunity. Markets became more sophisticated, and credit systems developed. The growth of commerce created a wealthy merchant class that would become increasingly important. 3 daimyo emerged who would end the Sengoku period's chaos and reunify Japan. Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, often called the 3 unifiers, successively worked to bring Japan under centralized control. A Japanese saying captures their characters. Nobunaga pounded the rice, Hideyoshi kneaded the dough, and Ieyasu ate the cake. Oda Nobunaga began the unification process. Rising from a minor daimyo family, he gained control of central Japan through military genius and ruthless tactics. He embraced new technologies, particularly firearms, creating disciplined armies that could defeat traditional warrior forces. In 1570, he destroyed the Enryakuji temple complex on Mount Hiei, killing thousands of monks who opposed him. This demonstrated his willingness to challenge traditional powers. Nobunaga welcomed European traders and missionaries, seeing them as useful counterweights to Buddhist institutions he distrusted. He protected Christians and encouraged trade. His capital at Azuchi featured a magnificent castle demonstrating his power and taste. By 1582, he controlled much of central Japan and seemed poised to complete unification. Nobunaga's career ended dramatically in 1582. While staying at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto with only a small guard, he was attacked by Akechi Mitsuhide, one of his own generals. Trapped and betrayed, Nobunaga committed suicide. This shocking event threw Japan into chaos once again. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, one of Nobunaga's most capable generals, quickly avenged his master. Though born a peasant, Hideyoshi had risen through military talent to become Nobunaga's trusted commander. After defeating Akechi and eliminating other rivals, he continued Nobunaga's unification efforts. By 1590, he controlled all of Japan. Hideyoshi implemented policies that would shape Japan for centuries. He conducted land surveys, establishing clear ownership and tax obligations. He decreed a sword hunt, confiscating weapons from peasants and strictly separating warriors from farmers. This created rigid class distinctions and disarmed the peasantry, making future rebellions difficult. He also banned Christianity, though enforcement was initially lax. In 1592 and again in 1597, Hideyoshi launched invasions of Korea, intending to conquer China. These campaigns were disasters. Korean resistance, aided by Chinese armies and the brilliant Korean admiral Yi Sun-sin, thwarted Japanese ambitions. The invasions devastated Korea, killed hundreds of thousands, and achieved nothing. When Hideyoshi died in 1598, Japanese forces withdrew. Hideyoshi's death created another succession crisis. His young son, Hideyori, lacked the authority to maintain his father's coalition. Daimyo divided into factions supporting either Hideyori or Tokugawa Ieyasu, Hideyoshi's most powerful vassal. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, one of history's most decisive battles. Nearly 200,000 warriors fought in a single day. Tokugawa Ieyasu led the Eastern Coalition, while Ishida Mitsunari commanded forces loyal to Hideyori. When several Western commanders defected during the battle, Ieyasu's victory became certain. Sekigahara's outcome determined Japan's future. Ieyasu confiscated lands from defeated daimyo, redistributing them to loyal followers. He controlled the country's most productive agricultural regions and strategic positions. In 1603, the emperor appointed him shogun. The Tokugawa shogunate would rule Japan for the next 265 years, finally bringing peace after more than a century of warfare. The Edo period, spanning 1603 to 1868, brought Japan its longest period of peace and stability. Under Tokugawa rule, Japan developed a sophisticated urban culture, experienced economic growth, and maintained international isolation. This era established patterns that continue to influence Japanese society. Tokugawa Ieyasu established his government at Edo, modern Tokyo, a small castle town in eastern Japan. This location, away from Kyoto's imperial court and traditional power centers, allowed the Tokugawa to build authority independent of existing institutions. Edo would grow into one of the world's largest cities, eventually surpassing Kyoto in size and importance. The Tokugawa created a political system designed to prevent the warfare that had plagued the Sengoku period. They divided daimyo into three categories. Shinpan, related to the Tokugawa family, controlled strategic regions. Fudai, vassals who supported Ieyasu before Sekigahara, received important lands and governmental positions. Tozama, outside lords who had opposed or remained neutral at Sekigahara, were given peripheral lands and excluded from central government. The Sankin Kotai system required daimyo to maintain residences in Edo and spend alternate years in the capital. Their wives and heirs remained in Edo as hostages. This system achieved multiple goals. It kept daimyo under surveillance, prevented them from building power bases in their domains, and drained their finances through the expense of maintaining two establishments and traveling with large retinues. Daimyo governed their domains with considerable autonomy in internal affairs. They collected taxes, administered justice, and organized local administration. However, the shogunate carefully controlled matters affecting national security and stability. Laws restricted castle construction, regulated marriage alliances between daimyo families, and prohibited unauthorized military mobilization. The shogunate maintained direct control over major cities, mines, and strategic territories. These tenryo lands provided revenue and allowed the Tokugawa to monitor important economic and political centers. The shogunate also controlled foreign relations and oversaw religious institutions. Social structure became rigidly defined during the Edo period. The Shi no Kosho system ranked society in four classes. Samurai occupied the highest position, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants. Below these official classes were outcasts who performed tasks considered ritually polluting. While this hierarchy reflected Confucian principles, reality was more complex. Wealthy merchants often wielded more practical power than impoverished samurai. Samurai transformed during the Edo period. With warfare ended, they became bureaucrats and administrators rather than warriors. Most samurai served their daimyo as officials, managing domains, collecting taxes, and maintaining order. They received stipends in rice rather than controlling land directly. This transformation from military aristocrats to salaried bureaucrats had profound effects on samurai culture and identity. The shogunate actively promoted Neo-Confucianism as official ideology. This philosophy emphasized social harmony, loyalty to superiors, and acceptance of one's position in society's hierarchy. It provided intellectual justification for Tokugawa rule and encouraged stability. Schools teaching Confucian texts spread throughout Japan, increasing literacy and creating a shared body of knowledge among elites. Christianity posed a perceived threat to Tokugawa authority. Christians had supported Hideyoshi's enemies, and their loyalty to the Pope troubled rulers who demanded absolute obedience. Between 1612 and 1650, the shogunate systematically suppressed Christianity. Thousands were executed, often after brutal torture designed to force apostasy. The Shimabara Rebellion of 1637 to 1638, where Christian peasants rebelled against oppressive taxation and persecution, prompted intensified suppression. The shogunate imposed Sengoku, closed country, in the 1630s. Foreign trade was restricted to Nagasaki, where Dutch and Chinese merchants could operate under strict supervision. The Dutch were confined to Dejima, an artificial island in Nagasaki harbor, and treated as prisoners rather than guests. No Japanese could leave the country or return if abroad. Foreign books were banned except for those concerning science and technology. This isolation was never total. The Dutch presence maintained contact with European knowledge. The shogunate encouraged rangaku, Dutch learning, particularly in medicine, astronomy, and military technology. Through Nagasaki, information about the outside world continued to reach Japan. Trade with Korea continued through the Tsushima domain, and the Ryukyu kingdom maintained tributary relations with both China and Japan. Despite isolation, Edo period Japan experienced vibrant economic growth. Agricultural productivity increased through new crop strains, improved techniques, and land reclamation. The population grew from approximately 12 million in 1600 to 30 million by the early 18th century, then stabilized. Urbanization proceeded rapidly, with Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto becoming great cities. A market economy developed. Daimyo converted rice taxes into cash to purchase goods in urban markets, creating a sophisticated commercial system. Merchant houses established networks spanning Japan. Credit systems, including rice futures traded in Osaka, emerged. The economy's monetization increased, though rice remained the standard of value for samurai stipends. Merchants accumulated wealth, despite their low social status. Great merchant houses like Mitsui and Sumitomo built commercial empires. They developed business practices and organizational structures that prefigured modern corporations. The wealth disparity between merchants and impoverished samurai created social tensions, with samurai resenting merchants' economic power while depending on them for loans and goods. Urban culture flourished during the Edo period. The pleasure quarters of cities, particularly Yoshiwara in Edo, became centers of sophisticated entertainment. These licensed districts offered not just prostitution, but also theater, music, art, and refined social interaction. Courtesans at the highest ranks were accomplished in poetry, music, and conversation, serving as cultural arbiters. Kabuki theater emerged as popular entertainment. Unlike aristocratic No, Kabuki appealed to commoners with dramatic stories, spectacular staging, and virtuoso acting. Kabuki actors became celebrities, their images reproduced in woodblock prints. The art form developed distinctive conventions, from elaborate makeup and costumes to the onagata, male actors specializing in female roles. Bunraku puppet theater achieved artistic heights during the Edo period. Playwright Chikamatsu Monzeman wrote masterpieces for puppet theater that explored themes of love, duty, and social conflict. The large puppets, operated by multiple handlers visible to the audience, created performances of remarkable emotional power. Narrators and musicians provided voices and accompaniment, creating total theatrical experiences. Woodblock printing revolutionized art and publishing. Ukiyo-e, pictures of the floating world, depicted actors, courtesans, landscapes, and scenes from daily life. Artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige created images that combined technical mastery with profound aesthetic vision. Hokusai's Great Wave off Kanagawa became one of the world's most recognized artworks. These prints were affordable to common people, democratizing art ownership. Literature thrived in various genres. Ihara Saikaku wrote novels exploring merchant life and human desires with humor and realism. Matsuo Basho elevated haiku poetry to high art, creating brief verses that captured moments of insight with economy and depth. His travel diary, Narrow Road to the Deep North, combined prose and poetry in accounts of journeys through rural Japan. These works established enduring Japanese literary traditions. Education spread widely during the Edo period. Domain schools trained samurai children in Confucian classics, military arts, and administration. Commoners attended Terakoya, temple schools teaching reading, writing, and mathematics. By the period's end, Japan had one of the world's highest literacy rates. This educated population would prove crucial during the modernization of the Meiji era. Science and scholarship developed despite isolation. Japanese scholars studied Western science through Dutch books, making significant advances in medicine, astronomy, and geography. Sugata Genpaku translated a Dutch anatomy text, revolutionizing Japanese medical understanding. Scholars compiled encyclopedias, studied natural history, and investigated mathematics. This intellectual ferment prepared Japan to rapidly absorb Western knowledge when isolation ended. Agriculture remained fundamental to the economy and society. Most Japanese were farmers living in villages organized around rice cultivation. The annual cycle of planting, maintaining, and harvesting rice structured rural life. Villages governed themselves largely autonomously, managing irrigation, resolving disputes, and organizing festivals. The stability of Edo period Japan rested on this productive agricultural base. Natural disasters periodically disrupted life. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and typhoons struck with devastating regularity. The Great Mireki Fire of 1657 destroyed much of Edo, killing perhaps 100,000 people. Famines caused by cold weather, crop failures, or floods killed tens of thousands. The Tenmei famine of 1782 to 1788 may have killed nearly 1 million people. These disasters strained the social system and challenged governmental capacity. Peasant uprisings occurred periodically throughout the Edo period. Excessive taxation, corrupt officials, or natural disasters prompted farmers to protest, sometimes violently. While the shogunate usually suppressed these rebellions, they indicated underlying tensions. Peasants developed sophisticated tactics, using petitions and coordinated action to pressure authorities for relief. The rigid social system faced increasing strain as the period progressed. Impoverished samurai, unable to live on fixed stipends eroded by inflation, borrowed from merchants or engaged in handicrafts to survive. Wealthy peasants purchased samurai status or married into samurai families. Merchants wielded economic power disproportionate to their official status. The ideology of fixed social positions diverged increasingly from reality. Intellectual currents challenged Tokugawa orthodoxy. The Kokugaku movement, national learning, studied ancient Japanese texts to recover supposedly pure native traditions predating Chinese influence. These scholars emphasized Japan's unique character and the emperor's central role in Japanese identity. Their ideas would influence the movement to restore imperial rule. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, foreign ships increasingly appeared in Japanese waters. Russian, British, and American vessels sought trade or refuge. The shogunate ordered them away, but the pressure mounted. Western powers, having forced China to open trade through military action, turned attention toward Japan. In 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with a squadron of steam-powered warships called Black Ships by Japanese observers. Perry delivered a letter from President Millard Fillmore demanding that Japan open trade relations. His warship's military superiority was obvious. Perry departed, promising to return the following year for an answer. Perry's arrival created crisis. The shogunate, for the first time in centuries, solicited opinions from daimyo and even the imperial court on how to respond. This unprecedented consultation revealed the government's weakness. Opinions divided. Some advocated resistance regardless of consequences. Others recognized that Japan could not defeat Western military technology and argued for accommodation while building strength. When Perry returned in 1854, the shogunate signed the Treaty of Kanagawa, opening 2 ports to American ships for provisions and establishing a consulate. Similar treaties followed with other Western powers. In 1858, the Treaty of Amity and Commerce opened additional ports, established extraterritoriality for Westerners, and limited Japanese tariff autonomy. These unequal treaties became sources of lasting resentment. The shogunate's capitulation to foreign pressure undermined its legitimacy. Critics, particularly from Tozama, domains like Satsuma and Choshu that had long resented Tokugawa dominance, called for respecting the emperor and expelling the barbarians. This Sono-Joi movement attracted idealistic young samurai willing to use violence against foreigners and shogunate supporters. Conflict escalated. In 1860, the shogunate's chief minister was assassinated. In 1862, British subjects were killed by Satsuma samurai. Western powers retaliated with military force, demonstrating their overwhelming superiority. These confrontations convinced some Sono-Joi advocates that Japan must adopt Western technology to resist Western power. Meanwhile, the shogunate attempted reforms to strengthen its position. It purchased Western weapons, established a modern navy, and reorganized military forces. However, these efforts came too late and proved insufficient. The shogunate faced opposition from powerful domains, a restive population, and a court emboldened by the Sono-Joi movement. In 1867, Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu, recognizing his government's untenable position, resigned and nominally returned power to Emperor Meiji. This restoration was partly a strategic retreat as Yoshinobu hoped to maintain influence in a reformed government. However, forces from Satsuma and Choshu executed a coup, establishing a new government that excluded Tokugawa influence. The Boshin War of 1868 to 1869 pitted pro-imperial forces against shogunate loyalists. Though some fighting was fierce, particularly at Aizu and Hakodate, the imperial forces' superiority in weapons and organization brought relatively quick victory. The last shogunate supporters surrendered in 1869. The Edo period had ended. The Edo period left complex legacies. Its long peace allowed population growth, economic development, and cultural flourishing. Urban culture reached sophisticated heights. Education spread widely. However, the rigid social system and international isolation left Japan vulnerable when confronted with Western power. The period's achievements and limitations would shape Japan's dramatic transformation during the Meiji era. The Meiji period, spanning 1868 to 1912, witnessed one of history's most dramatic transformations. In less than 50 years, Japan evolved from an isolated feudal society into a modern industrial nation capable of defeating a European power in war. This achievement required revolutionary changes in political structure, economic organization, social systems, and cultural practices. The Meiji Restoration began with the emperor's formal reassumption of authority in January 1868. The Charter Oath, proclaimed in April, outlined the new government's principles. It promised deliberative assemblies, public discussion of policy, pursuit of knowledge worldwide, and abandonment of outdated customs. These sweeping goals indicated determination to transform Japan completely. The Restoration's young leaders, many from Satsuma and Choshu domains, faced enormous challenges. Foreign powers had imposed unequal treaties. Japan's military technology lagged far behind the West. The country lacked modern industries, infrastructure, or institutions. Regional daimyo controlled autonomous domains. The task of creating a centralized modern state seemed overwhelming. The government moved quickly to consolidate power. In 1869, daimyo were persuaded to return their domains to the emperor. By 1871, the domain system was abolished entirely, replaced by prefectures under centrally appointed governors. This eliminated the political structure that had existed for centuries. Some daimyo received compensation and positions in the new order, while others lost power and status. The samurai class faced elimination. The government ended stipends that had supported samurai for generations. Former samurai received bonds as compensation, but these quickly lost value through inflation and bad investments. Many samurai, suddenly without income or purpose, struggled to survive. The government prohibited wearing swords in 1876, stripping samurai of their most visible status symbol. Predictably, some samurai rebelled. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Saigo Takamori, represented the last major samurai uprising. Saigo, a restoration hero who had become disillusioned with the new government, led thousands of disaffected samurai in revolt. The government mobilized a conscript army of commoners, demonstrating that traditional warrior skills no longer determine military outcomes. After months of fighting, government forces crushed the rebellion. Saigo committed suicide, becoming a tragic hero. The government established universal military conscription in 1873. All men, regardless of class, owed 3 years of military service. This built a modern army while breaking down class barriers. Peasant conscripts could rise through ranks based on merit. The military became an important vehicle for social mobility and national integration. Education reform accompanied military modernization. The government established a national education system in 1872, requiring elementary education for all children. Schools taught not just traditional subjects, but also Western science, mathematics, and languages. The curriculum emphasized loyalty to emperor and nation, using education to create citizens with shared identity and values. Universities were established or reorganized to train experts in specialized fields. Tokyo Imperial University, founded in 1877, became the premier institution. Students studied law, medicine, engineering, science, and literature, often taught by foreign instructors. Graduates staffed government ministries, military, and businesses, forming a new meritocratic elite. The government sent missions abroad to study Western institutions and technology. The Iwakuro mission of 1871 to 1873 spent nearly 2 years visiting the United States and Europe. Mission members observed governments, factories, schools, and military establishments. They returned convinced that Japan must adopt Western methods while maintaining Japanese identity. Legal reform transformed Japan's judicial system. The government hired French legal experts to draft civil and criminal codes based on European models. Courts were reorganized along Western lines. Traditional practices like torture in interrogations and collective responsibility for crimes were abolished. Japan sought to demonstrate to Western powers that it had become a civilized nation worthy of equal treatment. Economic modernization required massive investment. The government built railroads, telegraph lines, shipyards, and factories. It established postal and banking systems. Model factories demonstrated new technologies and trained workers. The government hired thousands of foreign experts called Oyatoi Gaikokujin to teach industrial techniques and manage projects. These investments strained government finances. Initial funding came from land taxes, which fell heavily on farmers. The government also borrowed internationally. Financial crisis threatened several times, but careful management and growing revenues from industry eventually stabilized finances. The government began selling state enterprises to private investors in the 1880s, creating the foundation for zaibatsu, large industrial conglomerates. Agriculture remained fundamental despite industrialization. Most Japanese continued to farm. The government encouraged agricultural improvements through education and model farms. New crop varieties and techniques increased productivity. However, tenant farmers paying high rents to landlords often remained impoverished. Agricultural surpluses helped finance industrialization, but created rural poverty that would cause problems later. Silk production became Japan's most important export industry. Japanese silk, prized for quality, found ready markets in the West. Silk reeling mills, often employing young women from rural areas, became important early industries. Export revenues helped pay for imported machinery and raw materials needed for other industries. Heavy industry developed more slowly. Shipbuilding and steel production required massive capital investment and technical expertise. The government supported these strategic industries through subsidies and guaranteed purchases. By the early 20th century, Japan was producing ships and steel domestically, reducing dependence on imports. Social changes accompanied economic transformation. Traditional customs faced criticism as backward. The government encouraged Western dress, hairstyles, and social practices. The emperor appeared in Western military uniforms rather than traditional court dress. Western architecture appeared in cities. The Rokumeikan, a Western-style building in Tokyo, hosted balls where Japanese and foreigners danced together, symbolizing Japan's entrance into international society. Women's status evolved in complex ways. Traditional restrictions eased somewhat. Girls attended schools, though less frequently than boys. Some women entered new professions as teachers or nurses. However, the Meiji Civil Code of 1898 reinforced patriarchal family structures. Women remained legally subordinate to men, unable to own property independently or divorce easily. Modernization did not mean equality. Christianity, banned during the Edo period, was tolerated after the Restoration. While most Japanese remained Buddhist or practiced Shinto, Christian missionaries established churches and schools. Christianity's influence exceeded the number of converts, as mission schools trained many future leaders. The government promoted state Shinto, distinguishing shrine worship as national ritual from religious Buddhism and Christianity. Shrines received government support and performed ceremonies honoring the emperor and nation. The imperial rescript on education of 1890, distributed to all schools, emphasized loyalty, filial piety, and devotion to emperor and country. This document became central to pre-war Japanese education. Political development proceeded gradually. The Meiji Constitution, promulgated in 1889, established a constitutional monarchy modeled partly on Prussia. The emperor held supreme authority, commanding military forces and exercising executive power. An appointed House of Peers and an elected House of Representatives formed the Imperial Diet. However, voting rights were severely restricted. Only men paying significant taxes could vote, meaning less than 2% of the population had suffrage initially. The Constitution established no responsible cabinet government. Ministers served the emperor, not the Diet. The military reported directly to the emperor through separate channels, making civilian control difficult. These structural features would have profound consequences. Political parties emerged despite limitations. The Liberal Party and Constitutional Progressive Party, founded in the 1880s, competed for Diet seats. They advocated expanded rights, lower taxes, and treaty revision. Government and parties often clashed, with cabinets dissolving the Diet or parties blocking budgets. Nevertheless, parliamentary politics took root. Treaty revision obsessed Meiji leaders. The unequal treaties imposed in the 1850s limited tariff autonomy and granted extraterritoriality to Westerners. Japan was determined to revise these treaties, viewing them as symbols of inferiority. Success came gradually. The Aoki-Kimberley Treaty of 1894 with Britain ended extraterritoriality, and the Kawakami-Hayashi Treaty of 1911 restored full tariff autonomy. These achievements proved Japan's acceptance as a civilized power. Military strength increasingly concerned the government. Japan faced potential threats from Russia and other powers. Building modern military forces required not just weapons but also strategic thinking and organizational capability. The army, influenced by German advisors, emphasized discipline and offensive spirit. The Navy, following British models, built modern warships. The First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895 tested Japan's military modernization. The war began over control of Korea, which China claimed as a tributary state, while Japan sought influence. Japanese forces, better trained and equipped than anticipated, won decisive victories on land and sea. The Treaty of Shimonoseki gave Japan Taiwan, the Pescadores Islands, and an indemnity. Korea gained nominal independence from Chinese influence. However, Russia, France, and Germany intervened, forcing Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula to China. This triple intervention humiliated Japan and demonstrated that despite victories, European powers could still dictate terms. The incident strengthened determination to build military power that could resist Western pressure. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 marked Japan's arrival as a world power. Tensions over Korea and Manchuria led to conflict with Russia. Most observers expected Russia, a vast empire with European military traditions, to easily defeat Japan. Instead, Japanese forces won stunning victories. The army captured Port Arthur after brutal siege warfare. The Navy destroyed the Russian Baltic Fleet at Tsushima in one of history's most decisive naval battles. The Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by American President Theodore Roosevelt, confirmed Japanese dominance in Korea and ceded Russia's lease of the Liaodong Peninsula and the southern half of Sakhalin Island to Japan. Japan's victory over a European power electrified Asia and shocked the West. It demonstrated that non-Western nations could master modern military technology and organization. Korea became a Japanese protectorate in 1905 and was formally annexed in 1910. Japanese rule in Korea was harsh, suppressing Korean culture and exploiting the peninsula economically. Koreans were forced to adopt Japanese names and forbidden to speak Korean in public. This colonial experience created lasting bitterness. Emperor Meiji died in 1912, ending an era. The period bearing his name had witnessed revolutionary changes. Japan had abolished feudalism, created a constitutional government, built a modern economy, and become an imperial power. The transformation's scope and speed were unprecedented. However, the changes also created tensions and contradictions that would intensify in coming decades. The Taisho and early Showa periods spanning 1912 to 1945 saw Japan emerge as a major power while sliding into militarism, authoritarianism, and ultimately catastrophic war. These decades combined democratic development with imperial expansion, ending in nuclear attacks and occupation. Emperor Taisho ascended the throne in 1912. His reign lasted until 1926, but illness left him incapacitated for much of the period. Nevertheless, the Taisho era witnessed important political developments. Party politics strengthened, and democratic ideas spread, leading historians to speak of Taisho democracy. Japan joined World War I on the Allied side in 1914. Its involvement was limited but profitable. Japan seized German territories in China and the Pacific. Japanese industry boomed, supplying Allied nations. The war enhanced Japan's international prestige and economic position. The post-war period brought disappointment. At the Paris Peace Conference, Western powers largely ignored Japanese proposals. Japan's request for a racial equality clause in the League of Nations Covenant was rejected, a humiliation that fueled nationalist resentment. Japan received League of Nations mandates over former German Pacific territories, but felt its contributions were inadequately recognized. Domestically, political parties gained influence. The principle that prime ministers should come from the party holding the most Diet seats became established practice in the 1920s. Universal male suffrage was enacted in 1925, quintupling the electorate. Labor unions, organized workers, and socialist parties emerged. Cities grew rapidly, and consumer culture flourished. Western cultural influences spread, particularly among urban youth. However, conservative forces pushed back against democratic trends. The Peace Preservation Law of 1925 criminalized organizations advocating changes to the imperial system or private property. Special police monitored leftist activities. Censorship restricted expression. Democracy coexisted uneasily with authoritarianism. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 devastated Tokyo and Yokohama. Over 100,000 people died. The disaster disrupted the economy and provided pretext for violence against Koreans and leftists, whom mobs blamed for supposed crimes during the chaos. The earthquake's destruction required massive reconstruction, straining national resources. Economic problems mounted during the 1920s. Agricultural prices fell, impoverishing rural areas. Banks failed, triggering financial crises. The Great Depression, beginning in 1929, devastated Japan's export-dependent economy. Unemployment soared and social unrest increased. The government seemed unable to address economic suffering. The military grew increasingly independent and aggressive during this period. The army and navy reported directly to the emperor rather than civilian government. Junior officers, radicalized by nationalist ideology and frustrated by economic problems, believed that military expansion could solve Japan's difficulties. They viewed politicians as corrupt and ineffective. Manchuria became the focus of military expansionism. Japan had maintained significant interests in southern Manchuria since the Russo-Japanese War. Many Japanese, particularly military officers, viewed Manchuria as vital to national security and economic development. When Chinese nationalism threatened Japanese interests, the military acted. In September 1931, officers of the Kwantung Army staged an incident at Mukden, using it as pretext to seize control of Manchuria. The government in Tokyo, though not informed beforehand, was unable to restrain the military. By early 1932, Japan controlled Manchuria, establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo. International condemnation followed. The League of Nations refused to recognize Manchukuo. Japan withdrew from the League in 1933. Political violence escalated. Military and nationalist fanatics assassinated politicians and business leaders viewed as obstacles to expansion. In May 1932, naval officers murdered Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi. The perpetrators received light sentences, their actions seen by many as patriotic. Party government effectively ended. Subsequent prime ministers came increasingly from military backgrounds. The February 26th incident of 1936 represented the climax of military radicalism. Young army officers led 1,400 soldiers in a coup attempt, assassinating several government officials and occupying central Tokyo. They demanded a military government to implement radical reforms. Emperor Hirohito intervened directly, ordering suppression of the rebellion. The revolt failed, and ringleaders were executed. However, the military's political power increased as moderates were intimidated or purged. War with China began in July 1937 with fighting near Beijing. What Japanese leaders expected to be a brief conflict escalated into total war. Japanese forces captured major cities including Beijing, Shanghai, and Nanjing. The capture of Nanjing was accompanied by atrocities. Japanese troops murdered hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. The Nanjing massacre became one of World War II's most infamous war crimes. Despite military victories, Japan could not force Chinese surrender. Nationalist forces under Chiang Kai-shek and communist forces under Mao Zedong continued resistance. Japan controlled cities and railroads but faced guerrilla warfare in the countryside. The conflict drained Japanese resources and manpower while bringing international condemnation. The government mobilized Japanese society for total war. The national spiritual mobilization movement promoted sacrifice and loyalty. Industries converted to war production. Rationing restricted consumer goods. Women were encouraged to support the war effort and increase births to provide future soldiers. Education emphasized ultranationalist ideology. Dissent was suppressed ruthlessly. Japan aligned with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, signing the Tripartite Pact in September 1940. This alliance was based on shared authoritarianism and opposition to the existing international order. Japan sought German recognition of its sphere of influence in Asia, while Germany wanted to deter American intervention in Europe. Relations with the United States deteriorated. America opposed Japanese expansion, supporting China with loans and military supplies. As Japan moved into French Indochina in 1940 and 41, seeking resources and cutting supply routes to China, America imposed economic sanctions. An oil embargo threatened to cripple Japan's war machine. Japanese leaders faced a terrible choice. Withdrawing from China was politically unthinkable after years of sacrifice. Yet without oil, Japan could not continue fighting. Some advocated negotiation, but the military demanded expansion to seize resources in Southeast Asia. This meant war with America, Britain, and the Netherlands, whose colonies possessed the oil, rubber, and minerals Japan needed. In December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, hoping to destroy America's Pacific Fleet and force negotiations from a position of strength. Simultaneously, Japanese forces invaded the Philippines, Malaya, Burma, and the Dutch East Indies. Initially, Japan achieved stunning success. By mid-1942, Japan controlled vast territories from Burma to the Central Pacific. However, Japan had awakened a power with vastly greater industrial capacity. America's entry into World War II mobilized resources Japan could not match. The Battle of Midway in June 1942, where American forces sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, marked the war's turning point. Japan would fight desperately, but could not replace losses or match America's growing might. Japanese conquests were brutal. Millions of Asians died under occupation. The military forced women into sexual slavery as comfort women. Prisoners of war were worked to death on projects like the Burma Railway. Local populations were exploited for resources and labor. Japan's rhetoric of creating an Asian co-prosperity sphere rang hollow against the reality of oppressive occupation. By 1944, American forces were advancing across the Pacific through island-hopping campaigns. Each battle was costly, as Japanese forces fought with fanatical determination. Kamikaze suicide attacks damaged American ships but could not stop the advance. Conventional bombing raids devastated Japanese cities, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. The fall of Okinawa in June 1945, after nearly 3 months of horrific fighting, brought American forces within striking distance of the home islands. Japanese leaders faced total defeat, but could not agree on surrender. The military demanded fighting to the last person. Moderates sought peace but feared military coup if they acted. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The explosion killed approximately 70,000 people instantly, with tens of thousands dying later from radiation. On August 9th, a second bomb destroyed Nagasaki. These weapons demonstrated that Japan could be annihilated without invasion. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan on August 8th, invading Manchuria. This shattered hopes that Soviet mediation might secure acceptable peace terms. Emperor Hirohito intervened directly, announcing Japan's acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, demanding unconditional surrender. On August 15,
1945, Hirohito's recorded voice was broadcast, announcing surrender. Most Japanese heard their emperor speak for the first time. Some military officers attempted a last-minute coup to prevent surrender, but it failed. On September 2nd, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japanese representatives signed surrender documents. World War II had ended. Japan had lost between 2 and 3 million soldiers and approximately 500,000 civilians. Its cities lay in ruins. Its empire was gone. The country faced occupation by foreign forces for the first time in its history. The imperial dream had ended in catastrophe. The occupation of Japan by Allied forces, primarily American, lasted from 1945 to 1952. This period transformed Japan politically, economically, and socially. The occupiers, led by General Douglas MacArthur as Supreme Commander, sought to demilitarize Japan, punish war criminals, and establish democracy. The first priority was basic survival. Japan's economy was devastated. Cities were rubble. Food shortages threatened starvation. Inflation spiraled out of control. Millions of soldiers and civilians returned from overseas, overwhelming social services. The occupation initially focused on providing basic necessities and preventing chaos. War crimes trials began in 1946. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East tried major war leaders. 7, including former Prime Minister Tojo Hideki, were executed. Many others received prison sentences. Additional trials throughout Asia judged thousands of accused war criminals. The trials were controversial, criticized for victor's justice, but they held Japanese leaders accountable for aggression and atrocities. Emperor Hirohito retained his throne, a decision that generated controversy. While some argued he should be tried for war crimes, MacArthur believed maintaining the emperor was essential for Japanese stability and cooperation. Hirohito renounced divinity in the New Year's rescript of 1946, declaring himself human rather than a living god. He became a constitutional monarch, stripped of political power but remaining a symbol of national unity. The occupation implemented sweeping reforms. A new constitution, promulgated in 1947, established parliamentary democracy with guaranteed civil rights. Article 9 renounced war and prohibited maintaining military forces, a unique provision. Women received equal rights and suffrage. The emperor became purely symbolic, with sovereignty residing in the people. Land reform redistributed agricultural land. The government purchased land from large landlords and sold it to tenant farmers at low prices. This created a class of small independent farmers and eliminated rural tenancy's feudal aspects. The reform won popular support and prevented rural radicalization. Educational reform removed ultranationalist content from schools and emphasized
democratic values. School decentralization gave local communities control. The occupation promoted coeducation and extended compulsory education. Teachers' unions organized to resist conservative pressures. Labor reforms legalized unions and established workers' rights. Union membership soared and strikes became common. The occupation initially encouraged labor organization as democratizing, but grew concerned when unions appeared influenced by communism. Cold War tensions shifted occupation priorities from reform to stability. Economic recovery proceeded slowly initially. American aid provided essential food and raw materials. However, hyperinflation and industrial stagnation continued. The Dodge Line of 1949 imposed austerity, balancing budgets and ending subsidies. This caused recession, but stabilized the economy and created conditions for growth. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, transformed Japan's economic fortunes. American military procurement orders flooded Japanese industry. Factories produced trucks, uniforms, equipment, and supplies for United Nations forces. This special procurement boom jump-started Japanese industry and began the economic recovery. The occupation ended officially in April 1952 with the San Francisco Peace Treaty. Japan regained sovereignty, though American military bases remained under a security treaty. Not all nations signed the peace treaty. The Soviet Union, China, and several Asian countries refused, leaving Japan without formal peace agreements with some neighbors. Post-occupation Japan focused on economic reconstruction and growth. The Liberal Democratic Party, formed in 1955 from conservative parties, dominated politics for decades. The LDP's formula combined pro-business policies, close alliance with America, and distribution of benefits to rural and urban constituencies. Political stability, though marred by corruption scandals, supported economic development. The 1950s and 60s saw rapid economic growth, averaging nearly 10% annually. Japanese industry adopted and improved Western technologies. Companies emphasized quality, efficiency, and continuous improvement. Manufacturing expanded from textiles and basic goods to electronics, automobiles, and machinery. Several factors enabled this economic miracle. Japan benefited from low military spending, protected by the American Security Alliance. Workers were educated, disciplined, and willing to work long hours. Management and labor cooperated with lifetime employment and seniority systems promoting loyalty. Banks provided patient capital. The government coordinated industrial policy through the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Japanese products gained reputation for quality. Initially viewed as cheap imitations, Japanese goods gradually earned respect. Sony transistor radios, Honda motorcycles, and Toyota cars found international markets. Japanese electronics and automobiles eventually challenged and surpassed Western competitors. Social changes accompanied economic growth. Urbanization accelerated as people migrated from farms to cities seeking industrial jobs. Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya grew into vast metropolitan regions. Nuclear families replaced extended households. Consumption increased as prosperity spread. Televisions, washing machines, and refrigerators became common. Women's roles evolved. The Constitution guaranteed equality, but traditional attitudes persisted. Women worked before marriage, but usually left employment upon having children. The model of salarymen working long hours while wives managed households became standard. Women's labor force participation, initially high, declined as prosperity allowed single-income families, then gradually increased again. Education became fiercely competitive. Success in entrance examinations determined university admission, which largely determined career prospects. Children attended cram schools after regular classes. Examination pressure created social problems, but also produced a highly educated workforce. The 1960s brought rapid change. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics showcased Japan's recovery to the world. The Shinkansen bullet train connecting Tokyo and Osaka demonstrated technological prowess. Economic growth reached its peak, transforming living standards. Japan felt it was rejoining the community of advanced nations. However, growth brought problems. Industrial pollution devastated communities. Minamata disease, caused by mercury poisoning from a chemical factory, killed or disabled thousands. Air and water pollution affected health across Japan. Citizens organized protests demanding environmental protection. The government eventually strengthened regulations. Student protests erupted in the late 1960s, influenced by global youth movements. Students occupied campuses protesting the Vietnam War, the security treaty with America, and university policies. Radical groups used violence, but most protests were peaceful. The movements declined in the early 1970s without achieving major objectives. The 1973 oil crisis shocked Japan's resource-poor economy. When Arab nations embargoed oil, prices quadrupled. Japan, dependent on Middle Eastern oil, faced potential catastrophe. However, industry responded with remarkable efficiency, improvements, and energy conservation. Japan emerged stronger, with industries more competitive than before the crisis. Economic growth continued through the 1970s and 80s, though at more modest rates. Japan became the world's second largest economy. Japanese companies became global leaders in automobiles, electronics, and other industries. Japanese management techniques were studied worldwide. Trade surpluses, particularly with America, created friction. Japan's economic success generated both admiration and resentment internationally. The bubble economy of the late 1980s saw asset prices inflate to absurd levels. Land values in Tokyo supposedly exceeded the value of all real estate in America. Stock prices soared. Speculation became rampant as people believed prices would rise forever. Japanese companies went on international buying sprees, purchasing famous properties like Rockefeller Center and Pebble Beach Golf Course. The bubble burst in 1991. Stock and land prices collapsed. Banks, having lent heavily against inflated assets, faced massive bad debts. Companies and individuals who had borrowed to speculate were ruined. The economy entered a prolonged stagnation called the Lost Decade, which actually lasted much longer. The 1990s brought economic malaise and social anxiety. Unemployment rose, growth stagnated. Banks concealed bad debts rather than acknowledging losses. Government stimulus packages provided temporary relief but accumulated massive public debt. Deflation set in, discouraging spending and investment. Japan's economic model, so successful for decades, seemed broken. Social problems emerged from economic stagnation. Youth unemployment increased. The promise that education and hard work guaranteed success no longer held. Freeders, young people taking temporary jobs rather than pursuing careers, became common. Hikikomori, individuals withdrawing from society and remaining in their rooms for months or years, represented extreme responses to social pressure. The Great Hanshin earthquake of 1995 struck Kobe, killing over 6,000 people and causing massive destruction. The disaster revealed government incompetence in disaster response. Later that year, the Aum Shinrikyo cult released sarin gas in Tokyo subways, killing 13 and injuring thousands. These events shook public confidence in government and social stability. Political reform occurred during the 1990s. The electoral system changed to combine single-member districts with proportional representation. New parties formed and reformed. The Liberal Democratic Party lost power briefly in 1993 and again in 2009. Political instability became chronic, with prime ministers changing frequently. Japan's population peaked around 2008 and began declining. Birth rates had fallen below replacement levels decades earlier. The population was aging rapidly, with increasing proportions of elderly, dependent on shrinking numbers of workers. Immigration remained limited, so demographic decline seemed inevitable. This created concerns about economic vitality and social security sustainability. Despite problems, Japan remained a wealthy, technologically advanced nation. Tokyo remained one of the world's great cities. Japanese culture, from anime and manga to video games and fashion, achieved global influence. Japanese companies continued innovating in robotics, electronics, and other fields. Quality of life remained high by our international standards. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami devastated northeastern Japan. The magnitude 9.1 earthquake, one of the most powerful ever recorded, triggered a tsunami with waves over 40 meters high. Nearly 20,000 people died. The tsunami damaged the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, causing meltdowns and releasing radiation. The disaster traumatized the nation and prompted questions about nuclear power. Recovery from the disaster demonstrated Japanese resilience. Communities rebuilt. The government decontaminated affected areas. However, the nuclear accident's long-term consequences continued to affect thousands who evacuated and could not return home. The disaster also revealed ongoing problems with bureaucracy, transparency, and crisis management. In 2012, Shinzo Abe became prime minister, beginning the longest tenure in Japanese history. His economic program, called Abenomics, combined monetary easing, fiscal stimulus, and structural reforms. The economy showed some improvement, though not as much as hoped. Abe also pursued nationalist agenda, revising textbooks, visiting Yasukuni Shrine, honoring war dead, including war criminals, and reinterpreting the Constitution to allow collective self-defense. Japan faced challenges from a more assertive China and unpredictable North Korea. Territorial disputes with China over the Sengoku Islands and with South Korea over Takeshima became recurring sources of tension. North Korea's nuclear weapons and missile programs threatened Japanese security. These challenges prompted debates about Japan's pacifist constitution and defense capabilities. The coronavirus pandemic beginning in 2020 affected Japan like all nations. The government's response combined relatively light restrictions with public cooperation. Japan avoided the worst death tolls seen elsewhere, though the pandemic stressed the healthcare system and economy. The postponement of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics symbolized the disruption, though the Games eventually proceeded in 2021 without spectators. Shinzo Abe resigned in 2020 due to health problems. His assassination in 2022 while campaigning shocked the nation. The killing by a man holding grievances against a religious organization sparked investigations into relationships between politicians and the Unification Church. The scandal affected the Liberal Democratic Party's standing, but did not displace it from power. Contemporary Japan faces multiple challenges. The aging society requires increasing resources for elderly care, while the working-age population shrinks. Economic stagnation has persisted for decades, though recent years have seen modest growth. Income inequality has increased, and the middle class feels squeezed. Young people face uncertain economic prospects. The traditional employment system of lifetime employment and seniority is breaking down, creating insecurity. Women remain underrepresented in leadership despite legal equality. Japan ranks poorly in international gender equality indices. Work culture emphasizes long hours and face time, making work-life balance difficult. The culture expects women to manage households and childcare, limiting career advancement. Though attitudes are slowly changing, traditional gender roles remain influential. Immigration has increased, but remains limited compared to other developed nations. Japan has accepted more foreign workers in recent years, particularly in manufacturing, construction, and care work. However, the government has been reluctant to admit immigrants in large numbers or provide clear paths to permanent residence and citizenship. This limits one solution to demographic decline. Regional disparities have grown. Rural areas face population decline, aging demographics, and economic stagnation. Young people migrate to cities seeking opportunities. Small towns struggle to maintain schools, hospitals, and basic services. Urban concentration, particularly in the Tokyo region, continues to increase. Environmental challenges include managing radioactive contamination from Fukushima, addressing climate change, and balancing development with conservation. Japan is committed to carbon neutrality by 2050 and is investing in renewable energy. However, the country remains dependent on fossil fuel imports and faces difficult energy choices after reducing nuclear power following Fukushima. Japan's international role continues to evolve. The country maintains its alliance with the United States, hosting American military bases and cooperating on security issues. Relations with China are complex, combining economic interdependence with strategic rivalry. Historical issues continue to affect relations with South Korea and other Asian nations. Japan contributes to international peacekeeping and development assistance, though its role is constrained by constitutional limitations on military force. Japanese culture continues to influence the world. Anime and manga have passionate global followings. Japanese video games remain industry leaders. Japanese cuisine, from sushi to ramen, has become international. Japanese design aesthetics influence architecture, product design, and fashion. Interest in Japanese language and culture has never been higher globally. Technology remains a Japanese strength. Robotics, high-speed rail, and electronics continue to showcase Japanese innovation. Japanese companies lead in automotive technology, particularly hybrid and hydrogen fuel cells. However, Japan has lagged in some digital technologies. The country ranks behind in internet speeds, digital services, and technology startups compared to leaders like the United States, China, and South Korea. Education continues to be valued highly, though the system faces criticism. Rote, memorization, and examination pressure are seen as stifling creativity. Universities, while prestigious, are criticized for not producing enough innovation or global leaders. English education, despite years of study, often fails to produce fluent speakers. Reforms are ongoing, but progress is slow. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated some social changes. Remote work, previously rare in Japan's FaceTime culture, became more accepted. Digital transformation advanced as necessity forced adoption of online services. However, many traditional practices and attitudes persisted, showing both Japanese adaptability and preference for established ways. Political stability remains under the Liberal Democratic Party, which has governed almost continuously since 1955. Opposition parties have struggled to present compelling alternatives or gain lasting support. Voter turnout has declined, particularly among young people, suggesting disengagement from politics. Scandals periodically rock the political establishment but rarely result in lasting change. Japan's relationship with its imperial past remains complex. While the government has apologized for wartime actions, controversies persist over textbook content, territorial disputes, and compensation for victims. Different segments of Japanese society hold varying views on history, from those seeking fuller acknowledgement of past wrongs to those believing Japan has apologized enough. These debates affect international relations, particularly with China and South Korea. The imperial family continues to hold symbolic importance. Emperor Naruhito ascended the throne in 2019 after his father, Akihito, abdicated, the first abdication in over 2 centuries. The imperial family represents continuity with Japan's ancient past while adapting to modern expectations. Issues like allowing female succession and balancing privacy with public duties create ongoing discussions. Looking toward the future, Japan faces fundamental questions about identity and direction. Can the country address demographic decline while maintaining cultural distinctiveness? How can economic dynamism be restored after decades of stagnation? What role should Japan play in an increasingly complex international environment? How can traditional values be balanced with the needs of a changing society? These challenges are significant, but Japan has demonstrated remarkable capacity for transformation throughout its history. From the adoption of Chinese civilization in ancient times to the rapid modernization of the Meiji era to recovery from wartime devastation, Japan has repeatedly adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining cultural continuity. contemporary Japan combines ancient traditions with cutting-edge modernity in ways that fascinate observers. Ancient Shinto shrines stand beside gleaming skyscrapers. Traditional arts coexist with popular culture. Careful attention to craft and detail characterizes both traditional tea ceremony and high-tech manufacturing. This ability to honor the past while embracing the future remains distinctly Japanese. The story of Japan from the Jōmon period to the present is one of continuous change and adaptation. From small hunter-gatherer communities to imperial power to post-war economic giant, Japan has undergone multiple transformations, each era built on what came before while creating something new. The Jōmon pottery traditions influenced later ceramics. The Yayoi agricultural base supported all subsequent development. The centralization that began in the Kofun period shaped governance for centuries. Buddhism, introduced from Korea and China, was adapted into distinctive Japanese forms. The warrior culture of the medieval period influenced modern values. The Edo period's culture flowering established aesthetic traditions that continue. The Meiji transformation created modern Japan. The post-war miracle built on foundations laid over centuries. Throughout this long history, certain themes recur. The tension between adopting foreign influences and maintaining Japanese identity appears again and again. The relationship between centralized authority and local autonomy has been negotiated repeatedly. The balance between continuity and change has required constant adjustment. These tensions have not been resolved but managed through Japanese cultural practices emphasizing harmony, consensus, and gradual change. Geography has profoundly shaped Japanese history. The island nature provided protection from invasion while permitting controlled contact with the outside world. Limited agricultural land created pressure for intensive cultivation and careful resource management. Vulnerability to natural disasters fostered resilience and mutual support. The beauty of the natural environment influenced aesthetic sensibilities and spiritual beliefs. Japan's story demonstrates that small nations can exert influence beyond their size through cultural achievement, technological innovation, and economic development. It shows that non-Western societies can modernize while maintaining distinctive identities. It illustrates both the possibilities and perils of rapid change. It reveals how historical memory shapes contemporary politics and international relations. As Japan moves further into the 21st century, it carries this complex history forward. The challenges are real and serious. Demographic decline, economic stagnation, environmental problems, and international tensions require effective responses. Yet, Japan has faced seemingly insurmountable challenges before and found ways forward. The resilience, creativity, and determination that characterized Japanese responses to past crises remain present. The future is uncertain, as it always is. Japan may develop new models for dealing with aging societies. Innovation may restore economic dynamism. International cooperation may ease tensions. Social attitudes may evolve to address gender inequality and other issues, or challenges may prove overwhelming, leading to decline. The story is still being written. What seems certain is that Japan will continue to matter in the world. Its economy, though troubled, remains the third largest globally. Its culture influences billions. Its technology shapes daily life worldwide. Its example of rapid modernization inspired developing nations. Its experience with the post-industrial challenges offers lessons for others. Its unique culture enriches global civilization. For those seeking to understand Japan, history provides essential context. Current attitudes, institutions, and practices emerge from centuries of development. The tea ceremony and anime, bullet trains and ancient temples, corporate culture, and traditional festivals all connect to threads running through Japanese history. To understand Japan requires understanding where it came from and how it got here. This journey from Jōmon pottery to contemporary technology, from small agricultural communities to global economic power, from isolation to international engagement, spans more than 14,000 years. It encompasses triumph and tragedy, creativity and destruction, continuity and change. It is the story of a people who repeatedly adapted to circumstances while maintaining distinctive identity.